Since 19th April 1945, the war was nearly over, but the air still smelled of gunpowder and burning wood. The roads were covered with ashes, and the trees stood like broken bones against the gray sky. A small group of American soldiers, tired and dirty from weeks of marching, were moving through a quiet countryside near the edge of Germany. They had seen enough death to last a lifetime, but nothing could prepare them for what they were about to find. Lieutenant Jack Morris was leading the group. He was only 26, but the war had added years to his eyes. His men followed behind in silence, their rifles ready, their minds heavy with memories of lost friends. They had been ordered to check every village and structure in the area for hiding enemies or survivors. Most of the time, they found nothing. But as they walked past a line of trees, something strange caught Jack's eye. It was a large wooden barn, far from any house, standing quiet in the field like it had been forgotten by the world. Its roof was broken in places, and the doors were almost falling off. Jack raised his hand, signaling the team to stop. "We checked that barn," he said quietly. They approached slowly, weapons raised, expecting enemy soldiers or maybe refugees. Jack pushed open the creaking door. The smell hit them first: mildew, dust, and something else. Something human. Inside, the light came in through the holes in the roof, casting thin beams across the hay-covered floor. And then, from the shadows, came a sound. A whimper. Then another, and another. As their eyes adjusted, the soldiers froze. Children. Dozens of them. Sitting in the hay, wrapped in rags, their faces pale and thin. Some had bruises. Some were too weak to stand. A few crawled toward the light, thinking maybe this was a dream. Jack stepped forward, slowly lowering his rifle. "My God," he whispered. There were over 200 children in that barn. German children. Some no older than 5. Others maybe 15. Most were silent, eyes wide with fear. A little girl with dirty blonde hair clung to a baby. A boy with a limp tried to stand but fell. Private Lewis dropped his rifle and ran to help the boy. "They're starving," he said, his voice cracking. The soldiers didn't know what to do. They weren't trained for this. One of them began handing out pieces of chocolate from his ration pack. The children hesitated at first, unsure. Then hunger took over. Little hands reached out. Faces that hadn't smiled in weeks lit up, just a little. Jack ordered his men to set up a perimeter and call it in. "This isn't just some abandoned barn," he told the radio operator. "This is a war crime." As they waited for command, the soldiers sat with the children. Some helped feed them. Others wrapped them in their jackets. They asked questions in broken German, but most of the children couldn't talk. They were too tired, too scared, or maybe just too broken inside. One girl, maybe 12 years old, finally spoke. Her name was Elsa. "They hid us here," she said quietly, "away from the bombs, but no one came back." Jack's stomach turned. He looked around at the children, alone, forgotten, starving in the last days of a dying war. He had seen many horrors, but this would haunt him forever. The radio crackled that night, but no orders came. The higher-ups were too busy dealing with other parts of the collapsing front. Jack knew help might not arrive for a day, maybe more, so the soldiers decided they would stay. The barn became a battlefield of a different kind now, not one of bullets, but of survival. Inside, the children were huddled in corners, eyes still watching the soldiers with a mix of fear and hope. Their little stomachs grumbled louder than the wind outside. Some had fevers. Others coughed with deep, painful sounds that echoed through the rotting wood walls. Private Allen found an old water pump behind the barn and got it running. The water was cold and rusty, but better than nothing. They boiled it over a fire. The children drank like they hadn't seen water in days. Jack sent 2 men back toward the nearest village to find food, medicine, anything. He told them to take risks if they had to. "We don't let these kids die, Not after they made it this far, he said. Elsa, the girl who spoke earlier, became their guide. She moved through the barn slowly, pointing to the sick ones. She didn't smile, not even once, but she moved with purpose. That one hasn't moved in 2 days, she whispered, pointing to a little boy curled under hay. Private Lewis picked the boy up. His body was so light, it felt like lifting a jacket. He was breathing, but just barely. Jack sat down beside Elsa. "Who put you here?" he asked gently. She looked away. "A woman. She wore a black coat. She said she was saving us from the Russians. She locked the doors and said someone would come back." Jack felt something cold crawl up his spine. He had heard of this before. Nazi officers, desperate near the end, hiding children of soldiers, or children stolen from other villages, like property. Some didn't make it. Others were just abandoned. This wasn't just war. This was cruelty, cold and planned. That night, the soldiers slept in shifts. The barn had no proper beds, but they made do. Some gave up their own blankets. Others stood guard outside, rifles ready, in case anything or anyone came. But what came the next morning wasn't an enemy. It was something worse. The 2 men Jack had sent out returned. They weren't alone. Behind them were 3 German civilians from a nearby village, 2 old men and a middle-aged woman. Their faces went pale when they saw the children. One of the men started shouting in German, trying to leave, but the soldiers grabbed him. Jack confronted the woman. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice cold. She didn't answer. One of the children recognized her and began to cry. That's when Jack understood. "They left them to die," said Private Allen. "They all knew, and they just walked away." Jack's hands shook with rage. He had seen the enemy shoot, bomb, torture, but this? Letting children rot in silence while pretending life was normal in their little village? He locked the civilians in an empty shed nearby. "They'll answer for this," he said. Later that afternoon, help finally came. 2 U.S. Army trucks rolled in, along with a medical unit. Nurses rushed inside the barn, stunned by what they saw. Some cried. Others got straight to work. The soldiers stood aside, tired, dirty, their faces hollow. But inside each of them, something had changed. This wasn't just war anymore. This was about saving something human, something pure. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting golden light on the broken barn, Jack stood with Elsa at the doorway. She still didn't smile, but for the first time, she held his hand, and that was enough. The barn was quieter now, but not peaceful. The children were being moved, one by one, into the trucks. Some cried, afraid to leave the only place they had known for weeks. Others clung to the soldiers like shadows, too scared to let go. A few wouldn't move at all, thinking they were being taken somewhere worse. Jack had seen broken men before, but broken children, that left a different kind of wound on the soul. As the nurses worked, the medical officer pulled Jack aside. His face was pale. "Some of them might not make it," he said grimly. "Severe malnutrition, infection, fever. One of the boys has frostbite so bad he might lose his foot." Jack clenched his jaw. They survived bombs, bullets, and starvation. "They're not dying now." The medic looked away. "There's something else." He handed Jack a thin folder, some documents found in a hidden corner of the barn. Old Nazi paperwork, badly torn and water-stained. Jack flipped through the pages slowly. What he read made his skin crawl. Each page listed a name, birth dates, blood type, notes in cold clinical handwriting. Words like Aryan purity confirmed, re-education candidate, sapikot, sipinchoiti tanti fiu, orphans of enemy families. These weren't just abandoned children. Some of them had been taken from occupied countries, stolen, rebranded as Germans, held for experiments or to be raised under Nazi ideology. And then, when the Reich started falling, they were discarded like broken toys. Jack felt sick. His stomach twisted. This wasn't a barn. It was a cage built by monsters. He stormed back to the shed where the 3 German villagers were locked up. The woman was sitting in the corner, silent. The 2 men were arguing in hushed voices. Jack flung the door open. "Who built that list?" he demanded. The woman looked up slowly. Her eyes were red. "We were told not to ask questions," she whispered. "They brought the children at night. A man in uniform, SS. He said if we spoke, we'd be next." Jack stared at her. She looked ashamed, but he didn't know if it was guilt or fear of punishment. "You let 200 children rot in your backyard," he said coldly. "You knew," she broke down then, sobbing. "But it didn't change anything. Outside, the trucks were ready." Jack ordered the civilians to be taken in for questioning by military police. He wasn't sure what justice would look like in this mess, but he knew silence couldn't be forgiven. As the convoy prepared to leave, Elsa sat in the front seat of one of the trucks, holding the baby she had protected all this time. She looked at Jack through the window. He walked over and knelt beside the door. "Where will we go?" she asked softly. Jack hesitated. No one had given him a clear answer yet. Refugee centers? Orphan camps? Maybe even homes in America or Britain. But he didn't lie. "I don't know," he said. "But somewhere safe. Somewhere you won't be forgotten." She nodded. Her eyes were old now, older than any 12-year-old's should be. As the trucks began to move, Jack stood there, watching. His men stood beside him in silence. Nobody spoke. There were no cheers, no celebrations, just the wind blowing across a field where death had been expected, but life had been found instead. He turned to Private Lewis. "We write this down. Everything. Everything. The files, the names, the truth. The world needs to know," Lewis nodded. "People won't believe it." Jack looked at the barn one last time, now empty, its doors swinging open in the breeze like the mouth of some old ghost. "They will," he said, "because we were there." And deep down, he knew. This would be the story the world remembered. Not just because of the evil that created it, but because of what the soldiers chose to do next. The news didn't spread instantly. This was still 1945, and war zones didn't come with headlines. But within 2 days, word began to travel. First to the nearby American base, then across Army radio lines, and then to the press. By the 5th day, a war correspondent arrived. He stepped out of a jeep with a cigarette dangling from his lips and a notebook already open. His name was Franklin Doss, a sharp-tongued reporter known for writing stories the Army didn't always approve of. "They tell me you found a barn full of kids," he said flatly, eyeing Jack like he didn't believe a word. Jack didn't smile. "No," he replied. "We found a crime scene." Franklin blinked at that, and Jack led him to the barn. It was quiet now. The children had been taken to a temporary shelter at a nearby base, but the soldiers had left the barn untouched otherwise. Franklin stepped inside, and for the first time, he said nothing. The stained blankets, the piles of spoiled food, the cold metal tags left behind on the floor. He took it all in. Jack handed him the Nazi documents. Franklin flipped through them slowly, then looked up. This is bigger than anything I've written." Jack nodded. "Then write it right." That night, Franklin sent a dispatch to London, coded and urgent. By the time it reached Allied High Command, generals were reading it over stiff drinks, silent in their war rooms. Some were shocked, others were furious, but not all were sympathetic. In the coming days, something began to change. Orders came from High Command, and they weren't what Jack expected. Do not speak to local civilians about the children. Do not share details with unauthorized press. Destroy duplicates of the documents. Jack stared at the orders in disbelief. He called his captain on the field line. These are kids. Victims, why the silence? His captain didn't have a good answer. There's political pressure, Jack. You know how this works. The war is almost over. People want peace, not scandal. Jack slammed the phone down. Peace built on silence wasn't peace. It was cowardice. He met with Franklin in secret the next night. "Do you still have your notes?" Jack asked. Franklin grinned. "Hell yes. Then publish everything, whether they like it or not." And he did. Within a week, the story exploded. American soldiers rescue 200 children abandoned by Nazis ran across the front pages in New York, London, and Paris. Pictures of the children wrapped in soldiers' jackets, eating army rations with shaking hands, flooded the world, and with it came outrage, tears, anger, demands for answers. But not everyone was proud. Back in Washington, some officials were furious. The story made people question how such things were allowed to happen. The Allies were supposed to be liberators, but now the world was asking, how many more Barnes were out there? How many more secrets? Even inside the army, there were whispers. Some soldiers accused Jack of chasing glory. Others called him reckless. Jack didn't care. He had the faces of 200 children burned into his mind. That was all the reason he needed. Meanwhile, Elsa and the others were moved again, this time under armed escort to a larger camp in France. It was safer, cleaner, and better supplied. But many of the children struggled to sleep. Even with full stomachs, nightmares woke them. Some cried out for mothers they'd never see again. Others just sat alone, silent. Elsa clung to the baby constantly. She still didn't smile. A doctor at the camp warned Jack during a visit. These children may never recover emotionally. The trauma runs too deep. Jack looked over at Elsa, who sat by the window, watching the sun set. He didn't believe that. Not yet. But something darker was growing now. The more the world paid attention, the more it wanted to forget again. Governments began controlling the narrative. Red tape formed like vines. Soldiers who gave statements were threatened with silence. And then came the letter. Official orders. Jack Morris was being pulled from the field, reassigned, silenced. But he wasn't going quietly. The letter arrived in a plain brown envelope. No seal, no signature, just a cold typed order. Lieutenant Jack Morris is to be removed from active duty and reassigned to administrative work in Paris, effective immediately. No further interviews, no public statements. Jack crumpled the paper in his fist. It wasn't just reassignment. It was erasure. They wanted him off the front lines, off the radar, out of the story. But the truth wasn't something he could just bury under orders. Not after what he'd seen. Not after holding starving children in his arms and hearing their silence scream louder than any bomb. He walked out of his tent, face hard, mind racing. His unit watched him go, but nobody said a word. They knew something had shifted. And Jack? He was already making his decision. He wasn't following that order. Instead, he took the jeep meant to transport him to the base airstrip and drove the opposite direction, toward the refugee camp. When he arrived, the guards were surprised but didn't stop him. He was still in uniform, still technically in command. He walked through the tents until he found Elsa, sitting alone on a wooden bench, still holding the same baby in her arms. She looked up at him with tired eyes. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded. "I had to." The camp was bigger now. More children had been brought in, some from Poland, some from Hungary, a few even from Austria. Many of them were in just as bad shape as the ones from the barn. And still, no one talked about where they came from. No investigations, no accountability. The world wanted to forget. But Jack had a plan. That night, he met secretly with Franklin Doss again. The reporter had gone underground after publishing the story, facing pressure from both the U.S. and British governments. But he was still writing, Still angry. "There's more of these barns," Jack said. "I can feel it. We have to find them, and if the army won't help, we do it ourselves." Franklin lit a cigarette and looked at him across the flickering lantern light. "You're going rogue, Morris." "I'm going honest." Franklin laughed bitterly. "I like you, Lieutenant. You've got balls. But if we do this, we'll make enemies. Big ones. I've already made them." Over the next week, Jack and Franklin gathered maps, rumors, and whispers from the locals. Elsa helped, too. She spoke with other children, piecing together what they remembered. Trains, uniforms, names, towns. Patterns began to form. Barns, basements. Schools turned into holding centers. Children taken by SS units, stashed away, left to die when the war turned. This wasn't isolated. It was organized. A quiet, cruel system of child theft, reprogramming, and disposal. And now that it was exposed, someone wanted it buried again. One night, as Jack returned to his small tent at the edge of the camp, he noticed something strange. Footprints. Heavy boots. Too many. The flap opened, and he froze. Two men were already inside. Plain clothes. No rank, no insignia, but everything about them screamed authority. "Lieutenant Morris," the taller one said calmly. "You're coming with us." Jack didn't flinch. "Under whose orders?" "No need for questions," the man replied. "You're becoming a distraction, and distractions are dangerous in times like these." Jack stood still. His hand twitched toward his belt, where his sidearm still hung, but he wasn't stupid. He knew the moment he resisted, things would turn ugly, and he still had work to do, so he went quietly. But as they led him away under the cover of night, Elsa watched from a distance, her small hand clutching the baby tighter. She didn't cry. She'd seen too much for tears. But deep inside, something else was rising now, a fire. Because if the world was going to forget again, then maybe the ones who were forgotten would have to remind it. Jack was taken to a secure facility outside Paris. Not a prison exactly, but not freedom either. A gray building with no signs, guarded by men who didn't speak unless giving orders. He was stripped of his weapon, his rank badge removed, and placed in a small room with a steel door and no window. For days, no one spoke to him. Meals were slid through a slot in the door. No newspapers, no updates, no voices, just silence. And the slow, creeping feeling that he was being erased from history while the truth rotted in his chest. But Jack wasn't broken. Not yet. What they didn't know was that before he was taken, he'd given everything, documents, names, maps, notes, to Franklin and a few trusted soldiers. And Elsa, she had memorized parts of it, like a child memorizing a bedtime story. Except this one wasn't meant to soothe. It was meant to expose. And Elsa hadn't forgotten. Back at the refugee camp, things had changed. The children were better fed now, but not safer. Soldiers were coming more often, quiet ones, like the ones who took Jack. Some kids were being moved without warning, transferred to other facilities. No one said where. One morning, Elsa woke up to find the baby gone. A nurse said a doctor had taken her for treatment. But hours passed. Then a day. Then two. The baby never came back. Elsa didn't sleep that night. Instead, she went to the tent where Franklin Doss was writing by candlelight, his typewriter clacking like a heartbeat. When she entered, he looked up, surprised. "I need your help," she said in her quiet voice. Franklin nodded slowly. "Whatever you need." She handed him a small bundle. Names, dates, stolen from the camp office by a nurse who sympathized. It was a list of children relocated without explanation. Dozens. Elsa's eyes were sharper now. She wasn't a victim anymore. They're not just trying to forget, she whispered. They're still hiding them. Franklin looked at the papers, then at her. This is going to make powerful people very angry. I don't care, she said. Jack didn't stop. I won't either. Together, they started sending messages to the Red Cross, to journalists in neutral countries, to war crime investigators in London. They didn't know who would answer, but one did. A woman named Clara Weiss, a Jewish survivor, now working with a new agency investigating Nazi war crimes. She had lost her entire family in Poland. When she heard about the children in the barn, and now the missing ones, she came. Immediately, Franklin introduced her to Elsa. Clara listened to her story in silence. Then she said something that shocked even Franklin. Some of these children might be stolen Jews, she whispered. Orphans taken to be Germanized. If we find proof, this becomes more than just a scandal. It becomes evidence for Nuremberg. The world had already started forming courts to judge the Nazi leaders, but no one had mentioned children. No one had spoken of the barns or the black-coated women who disappeared into the night with babies in their arms. Until now, Clara made a promise to Elsa. We will find the baby, and we will get Jack back. Meanwhile, Jack was growing weaker. The isolation was working. He was talking to himself, dreaming of the barn, seeing children's faces in the shadows. Every day felt like another door closing. But on the 10th night, the door finally opened, and someone stepped inside. Not a soldier. A woman. Dark coat. Sharp eyes. Confidence like a blade. You're Lieutenant Morris? She asked. He nodded slowly, unsure if this was rescue or something worse. I'm Clara Weiss, she said. And you're coming with me. You're going to testify. Jack blinked. Testify? She smiled faintly. You're not just a soldier anymore. You're a witness to one of the greatest hidden crimes of this war. And you're not alone. As they walked out of the building, the sky above Paris was bright with morning. And Jack knew he wasn't buried. He'd been waiting for the world to open its eyes. And now it finally had. The courtroom in Nuremberg wasn't like anything Jack Morris had ever seen. Marble walls, rows of sharp-suited lawyers, judges in black robes, dozens of translators behind glass, and cameras. So many cameras, clicking and flashing as if justice could be captured in a photograph. Jack stood behind the witness table, wearing a clean uniform, his captain bars returned to his collar. But he didn't feel honored. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a storm, one that had waited too long to break. Clara Weiss sat in the gallery, stone-faced, nodding at him as he looked her way. And, just behind her, was Elsa. She had come. Her hair was tied back. She wore a simple dress, but there was fire in her eyes, the kind that no child should ever carry. She didn't look away as Jack took the oath. The room hushed. Jack's voice was steady, though his throat felt like stone. I led the unit that found the abandoned barn outside the town of Elsen on April 19, 1945, he began. Inside, we discovered over 200 children, German-speaking, malnourished, many injured, some unconscious. There were no adults present, he paused. The silence in the room grew heavier. Documents found in the barn, written by SS medical officers, identified many of the children as being selected for re-education. Some were listed with notations like racially acceptable, others as Slavic origin, suitable for processing. We believe these children were taken from occupied countries, then abandoned when Germany began to collapse. One of the defense lawyers stood. Objection, he's speculating on origin. Clara stood immediately. We have verification. Blood type records. Missing persons reports from Poland, Ukraine, even France. Photographs. These children didn't belong to the Reich. They were stolen. The judge nodded. Continue. Jack took a deep breath. Many of those children have never been reunited with their families. Some don't even remember their real names. And then, slowly, he placed a small photograph on the table. It was the baby Elsa had protected. This child, Jack said, voice tight, was removed from the refugee camp without explanation. No official records, no follow-up. We believe she was taken as part of a cleanup effort to erase the evidence. Gasps echoed across the room. He wasn't just testifying about Nazis anymore. He was exposing the cover-up after the war, by people in clean uniforms, on the side that was supposed to be righteous. Outside the courthouse, crowds began to gather. Reporters scribbled every word. The headlines were already being written. American soldier reveals cover-up of Nazi children program. Stolen children, the war's hidden victims. But not everyone was pleased. That night, Jack's hotel room was ransacked. Franklin Doss, who had arrived to cover the hearing, was attacked in the street. His notes stolen, his jaw broken, and Clara, she received a warning letter, no signature, just a message. Stop digging. Not every truth deserves a spotlight, but they didn't stop. The next day, Elsa testified. The room went dead quiet when she entered the stand. She spoke softly, her words measured. I was taken from a village near Krakow. I was 5. I don't remember my mother's face. They brought us to a place with white walls. They told us we were special. But then they put numbers on our papers. I saw children disappear, one by one. Her voice cracked. Some nights I heard them cry, and then the crying stopped. The judge asked her if she remembered the barn. She nodded. I remember the cold, the hunger, the dark, and then the door opened, and I saw Lieutenant Jack. He was the first face I saw that didn't look like a monster. Jack looked down, fists clenched. In that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't just about a war crime. This was about memory, truth, redemption. And somewhere, someone didn't want the world to remember. But the world was watching, now, and it couldn't unsee what had been found. The courtroom was boiling with tension now. The hearings were no longer just about the war. They were about the war after the war, about the things left behind, the things the world wanted to forget. For days, witnesses came forward, other soldiers, nurses. One woman who had worked as a secretary in an SS orphan processing center broke down mid-testimony, crying that she had been just following orders. But even her guilt couldn't erase what she had helped build. A quiet, systematic machine that stole childhoods like pocket change. And yet, pressure was mounting, not in favor of justice, but in favor of silence. Behind closed doors, diplomats whispered. Politicians wrote memos urging diplomatic caution. Some feared that opening this door too wide would expose Allied missteps, too. That maybe some of the people who handled these children post-war weren't much cleaner than those who took them. Jack could feel it happening. Truth turning slippery. One afternoon, Clara rushed into his hotel room with a telegram in her hand. "They're trying to shut the investigation down," she said breathlessly, saying the documents are incomplete, that the children can't be traced, that your testimony is emotional, not factual. Jack's hands curled into fists. And what about Elsa's? They called it unreliable. Because she was too young when it started. Jack stood up. They want it buried. Clara nodded slowly. And they're close to doing it. But then, fate delivered one final blow for the truth. The baby. She was found. Clara tracked down a Red Cross volunteer who had secretly helped smuggle the child out of the military-controlled medical center after hearing rumors she was going to be adopted abroad under a false name. The volunteer had hidden the child in a church-run orphanage in Belgium, hoping someone would come looking. When Jack and Elsa arrived, The baby recognized her instantly. She reached out. She smiled. It was the first time Elsa cried in months, and it changed everything. Photos were taken. Papers signed. Elsa was officially registered as the child's guardian. And more importantly, the orphanage had documents. Real documents. Ones that tied the child directly to the barn and to the Nazi re-education network. Jack brought those papers back to court. He slammed them on the table. "You wanted proof?" he said. "Here it is. You can deny my memory. You can ignore Elsa's pain, but this is in black and white. This child was meant to be erased." No more objections came. No more whispers. The court went quiet. When the final ruling came weeks later, it wasn't perfect, but it was loud. The tribunal officially recognized the existence of a Nazi child cleansing and re-education program. Several former SS officers were charged with crimes against humanity for their roles. The files from the barn were entered into permanent international archives. And Jack Morris? He was honorably discharged, but never reinstated. His name, while respected by many, became a problem for the very people who had once called him a hero. He never got his promotion. He never asked for it. Franklin's articles became a book. Clara went on to lead an international task force for child war victims. And Elsa? She chose to stay in Belgium with the baby, refusing all offers to be relocated or adopted. She never let go of her story, not once. She visited other camps, telling her truth, warning people. Years later, when she was grown, she stood at a podium at a United Nations memorial event, speaking to diplomats, presidents, and generals. "I was one of the forgotten," she said, "and if not for a soldier who disobeyed an order, I might still be." The crowd stood and clapped, but Jack, watching from the back row, just nodded once and wiped his eyes. Because that war, the one to keep memory alive, was never really over. It lived on in every barn left unexplored, in every silence too heavy to question, and in the eyes of a little girl who refused to be invisible again.